Could one of Hollywood's most beloved families have been hiding a deadly secret behind their glamorous facade? The Reiners were, by all outward appearances, the picture of success and stability. Rob Reine, the legendary filmmaker and actor, and Michelle Singer Reiner, his accomplished, devoted partner, seemed to live a life straight out of a Hollywood script. Awards, accolades, family dinners, laughter echoing through their Los Angeles home. All signs of a life that many could only dream of. But in the shadows of that seemingly perfect existence lurked a tragedy that would shock the world and leave millions questioning everything they thought they knew about fame, family, and trust. On December 14, 2025, that perfect image shattered. By the time the police and paramedics arrived at their estate that afternoon, the couple had already been claimed by violence that no one could have anticipated. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. The scene was surreal. A home filled with memories, photographs capturing decades of achievements and milestones, and yet an air of dread hung heavy in every corner. Paramedics were called at 3:30 p.m., their reports hinting at the horror awaiting them. Officers from the Los Angeles Police Department responded shortly after. What they discovered confirmed the worst suspicions and raised questions that would baffle authorities, the media, and the public alike. Rob, age 78, and Michelle, 68, had died from multiple sharp force injuries. A seemingly ordinary Sunday had turned into a nightmare. But it wasn't just the brutality of the deaths that stunned people. It was the people involved. The story quickly spiraled into a web of suspicion, betrayal, and unanswered questions. One son, Nick Reiner, 32, was taken into custody the very next day, suspected of having a hand in the deaths of his own parents. The Los Angeles police chief, Jim McDonnell, announced at a news conference that Nick was being held without bail, charged with 2 counts of murder. For a family that had been in the public eye for decades, this revelation was unimaginable. Could it really be true that a son, the very embodiment of family loyalty, was now implicated in the destruction of the people who had raised him, nurtured him, and loved him? As the world tried to reconcile this grim reality, another figure emerged in the shadows of the Reiner family story, Jake Reiner. Rumors, whispers, and subtle hints in various reports suggested that Jake's involvement was more than incidental, more than tangential. Could he have played a part in orchestrating, or at least influencing, the tragedy that had befallen this iconic family? This question, like a dark cloud, loomed over every news headline and social media post. Audiences worldwide found themselves gripped by the unfolding saga, unable to look away, yet terrified of what the next revelation might bring. Rob Reiner's career alone is enough to command the attention of millions. From his early days on All in the Family to directing beloved classics such as When Harry Met Sally, Stand By Me, and The Princess Bride, he became a figure synonymous with American cinematic excellence. Every film, every award, every moment on screen seemed to solidify his place in Hollywood history. And Michelle, though often in the background, brought a steadying presence and strength to their family life, a partner in every sense. Together, they appeared untouchable. The perfect Hollywood power couple. But appearances can deceive. What had once seemed like a life of prestige and joy was now being examined under the harsh light of tragedy. The medical examiner's report, released on December 17, 3 days after their deaths, confirmed that the Reiners had suffered multiple sharp force injuries. Every stab wound, every mark, told a story of violence and despair. And yet, even as the official findings were revealed, so many questions remained unanswered. Who had the motive? Who had the opportunity? And most importantly, who could commit such a heinous act against a family that had been admired and respected for decades? Before the medical examiner released the report, NBC News cited sources claiming the Reiners appeared to have died from stab wounds. The news spread like wildfire. Social media erupted with speculation, fans expressed disbelief, and Hollywood insiders whispered rumors behind closed doors. The contrast was stark. Here was a family that had once symbolized love, creativity, and accomplishment, and now they had become the center of a horrifying murder investigation. It was during these early hours of speculation that the focus shifted to the children, particularly Nick Reiner. On December 15, police arrested him on suspicion of murdering his parents. The world watched as a once private individual, a son and sibling, became the face of a public scandal. In a Los Angeles courthouse just 2 days later, Nick appeared for the first time, charged with 2 counts of murder, yet refraining from entering a plea. His silence, juxtaposed with the gravity of the accusations, only fueled the public's curiosity and horror. Could someone raised by Rob and Michelle, someone who had spent decades under their guidance, truly be capable of such an act? And then there was Jake Reiner, a name that had surfaced quietly in reports, but one that carried weight among those who knew the family. Was he simply a peripheral figure, or did he hold a more direct connection to the events of December 14th? Pope Leo XIV himself, whose recent statements have sent shockwaves through religious and social communities, hinted at the need for truth and accountability in the case. His words, cryptic yet pointed, suggested that the Reiner tragedy might not be just a domestic incident, but a larger narrative of influence, manipulation, and possibly betrayal. The world was now caught between facts and speculation. Every report, every statement, every rumor added layers to an already complex story. Questions multiplied faster than answers could emerge. How did a family that seemed perfect on the surface descend into such darkness? Were the media headlines accurately representing the reality, or was there a deeper story waiting to be uncovered? And most hauntingly of all, if the Reiner's own son had been involved, what drove him to such an unimaginable act? Even as authorities continued their investigation, the public couldn't help but speculate. Social media exploded with discussions about family dynamics, psychological profiles, and the hidden pressures of living in the spotlight. Hollywood, often seen as a realm of fantasy and illusion, was now revealed as a setting for a real-life horror story. Fans of Rob Reiner's work struggled to reconcile the man who had created some of their favorite films with the family drama that now defined his legacy. How could someone so admired become entangled in such a nightmare? The stage was set for a story of betrayal, tragedy, and shocking revelations. Every character, Rob, Michelle, Nick, Jake, and even Pope Leo XIV, played a role in a narrative that was still unfolding. What had started as a beautiful, high-profile family story had transformed into a chilling exposé of potential secrets and sinister possibilities. And as the investigation deepened, one thing became clear. The world was about to learn truths far more disturbing than anyone could have anticipated. The question hanging over all of this remained. Could someone close to the Reiners, someone within the family circle, truly have orchestrated their deaths? Could the very people who were supposed to protect and love them have contributed to this tragedy? And if so, what would that mean for justice, for the legacy of the Reiners, and for the millions of fans around the world who had celebrated their lives? As we begin this deep dive into the events surrounding December 14th, 2025, keep one question in mind. What really happens when fame, family, and trust collide in the worst possible way? The answers are not simple. They are tangled, painful, and profoundly shocking. And while this introduction sets the stage, the chapters to follow will uncover details, contradictions, and revelations that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the Reiners. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Could anyone have predicted that the boy from the Bronx, with a quick smile and a sharp wit, would grow up to become one of the most influential figures in American entertainment? Rob Reiner's journey to Hollywood stardom reads like a classic rags-to-riches tale, but beneath the surface of that story lies a complexity that few outsiders ever saw. By the time of his death in December 2025, Rob Reiner had become synonymous with both television and film excellence. His face, his voice, and his work were embedded in the cultural consciousness of generations. But as we now know, success and legacy sometimes cast shadows that even the brightest stars cannot escape. Rob's first taste of fame came with All in the Family, a television show that redefined American sitcoms. Playing the role of Michael Stivic, Meathead, he became the face of a generation caught between traditional values and new social realities. But the show's sharp humor and social commentary also shaped Rob himself, forcing him to navigate the delicate line between personal belief and public expectation. It was here, in the glow of television lights, that he learned the first lessons about public scrutiny, the pressures of performance, and the delicate balance of private versus public life. Could these early experiences in the entertainment industry have influenced the private tensions that would later define his family life? It's a question that lingers as we look back at his trajectory. By the late 1970s and 1980s, Rob had firmly transitioned into film directing, and it was here that his genius truly became apparent. Films like This Is Spinal Tap, Stand By Me, and The Princess Bride showcased not only his ability to entertain, but also his ability to capture the essence of human experience. Each project was a masterclass in storytelling, blending humor, pathos, and an acute understanding of the human condition. But behind every camera, behind every carefully crafted scene, was the man, Rob Reine, juggling the demands of family, fame, and personal ambition. How does someone maintain such a public persona while managing private relationships that are, by all accounts, incredibly complex? The question of complexity brings us to an important aspect of Rob's life: the balancing act between work and family. Hollywood, with its relentless schedules, ever-present cameras, and insatiable appetite for news, leaves little room for ordinary life. Yet Rob and Michelle had children, they had personal obligations, and they lived a life in which appearances mattered. Friends and colleagues have noted that Rob could be both intensely committed to his craft and fiercely protective of his family. But the very intensity that drove his success may also have contributed to the tensions simmering beneath the surface. Could ambition, passion, and creative genius sometimes clash with the demands of family life? In the Reine household, it seems they could, and tragically, they did. Let's pause and consider the broader implications of this legacy. When someone achieves a level of fame that Rob Reine did, every decision, every interaction, every moment is magnified. Small disputes become public fodder, private disagreements take on disproportionate significance. And when tragedy strikes, as it did on December 14, 2025, that same public spotlight amplifies every detail. The medical examiner's report, the police investigation, and the media coverage were all inevitable consequences of this high-profile life. But beneath the headlines, beneath the facts and figures, was a man whose life and career were interwoven with artistry, ambition, and ultimately, tragedy. Rob's influence extended beyond the films themselves. His work shaped the careers of countless actors, writers, and filmmakers. He became a mentor, a guide, and a visionary in the industry. Yet mentorship comes with expectations and sometimes tensions. People who work closely with creative visionaries often witness sides of them that the public never sees. Moments of frustration, anger, vulnerability, and even impatience. Could these dynamics have played a role in shaping not only Rob's professional environment, but also the emotional climate of his family? It's a possibility that cannot be ignored as we examine the events that culminated in the Reiner's deaths. Humor, a defining characteristic of Rob Reiner's on-screen and off-screen persona, also played a complex role in his life. The ability to defuse tension with a joke, to charm and entertain, is a skill that many in Hollywood covet. But humor can also mask deeper conflicts, conceal stress, and hide emotional pain. Family members often report that public figures like Rob can appear one way in public and another entirely in private. Could the very charm and wit that made Rob a beloved figure also have concealed fractures within the family unit? And here we reach a critical point: the juxtaposition of public perception and private reality. Rob Reine was admired, respected, and beloved. Awards, accolades, and media coverage painted a picture of a man who had achieved the American dream, who had navigated Hollywood with grace, talent, and integrity. Yet the events of December 14th revealed a more complicated truth. In the shadow of fame lay questions about trust, loyalty, and the pressures that success can place on familial relationships. These pressures, subtle yet persistent, are often invisible to the outside world until tragedy brings them into sharp relief. Rob's films themselves often explored themes of human complexity: loyalty, friendship, love, betrayal. Is it ironic, then, that his real-life story would echo these very themes in a tragic context? Stand By Me, a film about friendship and loyalty, or When Harry Met Sally, a story about trust and connection. These works reflect a deep understanding of human emotion. Yet, even someone who understands these dynamics intellectually is not immune to their consequences in personal life. This tension between art and reality, between public image and private struggle, forms a central thread in understanding Rob Reiner's life and the tragic events that followed. As December 14th approached, few could have predicted the horrors that awaited. Rob Reiner's reputation as a Hollywood legend remained intact, yet the events of that day would irrevocably alter how the world viewed him and his family. The interplay of fame, family, and personal conflict would come into sharp focus, revealing not just the shocking deaths themselves, but the complex web of human behavior, ambition, and emotion that led to them. Every interview, every media report, every rumor added layers to a story that was already incomprehensibly intricate. And yet, even with all this context, one question remains as piercing today as it did in those first days after the tragedy. Could someone close to Rob Reiner, someone within the family circle, truly have been involved in orchestrating the very events that took his life? Was this simply a family tragedy, or were there deeper, more disturbing forces at play? As we move to the next chapter, we will begin to uncover not just the public achievements of Rob Reiner, but the private complexities that may have set the stage for an unimaginable loss. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Who was Michelle Singer Reiner, really? To the public, she was the devoted wife of Hollywood legend Rob Reiner, a quiet presence behind the camera flashes, a partner in life and family. But like any woman in a high-profile Hollywood marriage, her story ran far deeper than public perception allowed. Michelle was not merely a shadow beside a famous husband. She was a force in her own right, a complex individual whose influence, decisions, and sacrifices shaped the Reiner family in ways that would become painfully evident in the tragedy of December 14, 2025. Michelle's life before meeting Rob was marked by ambition, intelligence, and a relentless drive to excel. She pursued her own career, navigated social and professional networks, and cultivated a life filled with personal achievement. When she met Rob, the two seemed to complement each other perfectly. He brought creativity, public acclaim, and charisma, while she provided grounding, emotional insight, and unwavering support. Their union was, on the surface, a perfect match, two individuals blending talent and love in ways that inspired those around them. But beneath the harmony, complexities simmered, differences, tensions, and pressures that only the most intimate of observers could fully comprehend. Michelle's influence on Rob's career cannot be overstated. While the world celebrated his work, she was often quietly advising, guiding, and managing many of the behind-the-scenes challenges that accompanied Hollywood fame. From negotiating professional conflicts to mediating personal disputes, Michelle played a vital role in maintaining equilibrium in both professional and domestic spheres. It is easy to overlook the labor and emotional energy invested by spouses of high-profile figures. But in Michelle's case, her contributions were both significant and transformative. Could some of these pressures, long hidden from public view, have contributed to the strains within the Reiner household? Family life with Michelle and Rob was outwardly ideal. Children growing up in a home filled with love, stability, and creative inspiration. Yet, as with any family, appearances can be deceiving. Those closest to the Reiners hinted at tensions, subtle yet persistent conflicts, that punctuated the family's interactions. Schedules, ambitions, and the relentless glare of the public eye created pressures that could fracture even the strongest of relationships. Michelle, despite her resilience and intelligence, was not immune to these pressures. She navigated them with poise, often masking inner struggles behind a serene public demeanor. To understand Michelle's role in the Reiner story, one must also appreciate her values. She was known among friends and colleagues for her commitment to justice, her empathy, and her unwavering belief in the importance of family unity. These traits made her not only a beloved mother and wife, but also a moral anchor within the household. Yet morality and influence do not always guarantee protection. Sometimes, those closest to us, children, siblings, friends, act in ways that defy comprehension. The events of December 14th would tragically reveal the limits of even the strongest moral grounding in the face of human unpredictability. Michelle was also fiercely private. Unlike her husband, who lived much of his life in the public eye, she valued discretion, maintaining boundaries that shielded her family from unnecessary intrusion. This privacy, while protective, may have contributed to a sense of isolation. Family conflicts, unresolved tensions, and emerging threats could simmer unseen, unnoticed by outsiders. How often do we forget that privacy can be a double-edged sword? It can protect, but it can also conceal peril. For Michelle, it seems it may have done both. As the events of December 14th unfolded, Michelle's presence in the narrative became tragically central. Her death, alongside Rob's, shocked not only the public, but also those who had known her personally. It was more than the loss of life. It was the collapse of a matriarch, a guiding figure whose influence had shaped the family's trajectory. In many ways, Michelle's death symbolized the vulnerability that even the most intelligent, capable, and protective individuals face when confronted with betrayal, violence, or unforeseen danger. Yet Michelle's life was far from defined solely by tragedy. Her achievements, her relationships, and her ability to maintain grace under pressure speak to a legacy that demands recognition. She cultivated deep friendships, mentored those around her, and balanced personal ambition with family loyalty. A complex equilibrium few could achieve. Friends recall her as someone who could command attention with quiet strength, offering insight, comfort, or a stern reminder of responsibility when needed. Her influence extended beyond immediate family, reaching into professional networks, social initiatives, and the very fabric of the communities she touched. One cannot discuss Michelle without acknowledging the emotional labor that defined much of her life. Behind every public appearance, every smile, every family photo, there were challenges that demanded courage and resilience. She navigated not only the pressures of Hollywood, but also the delicate art of parenting in a high-profile household. Raising children in the shadow of fame introduces unique pressures, public scrutiny, unrealistic expectations, and a constant balancing act between privacy and exposure. Michelle's ability to manage these pressures speaks to a profound strength that the public rarely witnessed. But it is precisely this strength that makes the tragedy of December 14th all the more poignant. And then there is the question of family dynamics. The Reiner's children, Nick and Jake, were raised in an environment that mixed love, expectation, and high standards. Michelle's influence was significant in shaping their moral compass, emotional resilience, and understanding of responsibility. Yet as the investigation into December 14th revealed, familial bonds can fracture in ways that defy logic. Could there have been warning signs? Subtle behaviors, disagreements, or conflicts that hinted at a darker trajectory? These questions linger as the narrative unfolds. Michelle's contributions to her family were both visible and invisible. While the world saw a poised, supportive wife and mother, behind closed doors, she was managing crises, mediating disputes, and safeguarding the well-being of those around her. Her death, alongside Rob's, represents not just the loss of two individuals, but the abrupt removal of the stabilizing forces that had kept a complex, high-profile household functioning. In many ways, Michelle was the unseen glue that maintained cohesion. Without her, fractures that may have been manageable became catastrophic. Her life also reflected the contradictions inherent in being married to someone like Rob Reine. A man of extraordinary talent, ambition, and public presence requires a partner capable of matching intelligence with diplomacy, vision with grounding. Michelle fulfilled this role with remarkable skill, yet the very qualities that made her indispensable may also have heightened tensions behind the scenes. The same awareness, foresight, and moral clarity that allowed her to protect and guide her family could also create friction, particularly when dealing with ambitious or unpredictable family members. As the investigation into the Reiner deaths progressed, Michelle's legacy became intertwined with questions of motive, loyalty, and trust. How could someone who had devoted so much to family, who had protected, guided, and loved, become a victim of such horrifying violence? Was it a consequence of circumstances beyond her control, or did the seeds of tragedy take root in dynamics that had been present for years? Every detail, every revelation, added depth and complexity to a story that was already profoundly shocking. The tragic events of December 14th also highlight the vulnerability of even the strongest individuals when faced with betrayal from within. Michelle's life, though filled with achievement and love, was not immune to the risks posed by those closest to her. Family relationships, particularly in households with high public profiles, are fraught with hidden tensions, unspoken resentments, and pressures that outsiders cannot perceive. In the Reiner household, these forces collided with fatal consequences. And yet, Michelle's story is not defined solely by tragedy. Her life exemplified strength, intelligence, and grace. Her influence on her husband, children, and broader community created ripples that will endure long after her death. As we explore the unfolding tragedy, it is essential to remember that Michelle was not merely a victim. She was a complex, capable, and profoundly influential individual whose absence is felt not just in her family, but in every sphere she touched. In examining Michelle's life, one must also confront the painful realities of human unpredictability. Even the most intelligent, compassionate, and diligent individuals cannot always control the actions of others, nor can they prevent tragedies rooted in the complexities of family, ambition, and desire. As the story moves forward, her role in the Reiner household, her influence on her children, and her private struggles will become central to understanding how a family that appeared so perfect could be struck by such unimaginable violence. So who was Michelle Singer Reiner, truly? She was a wife, a mother, a mentor, a protector, and a guiding force. She was a woman of immense strength, navigating the pressures of fame, family, and human imperfection with grace. And yet, despite all of her capabilities, she fell victim to a tragedy that would shake the world. As we move to the next chapter, we will explore the Reiner family before the tragedy. What life looked like in the household before December 14th, and the subtle tensions that may have set the stage for events that no one saw coming. But what came next would change everything, and no one could have predicted the darkness that awaited. The Reiners were a family admired by many, envied by some, and scrutinized by all. On the surface, they appeared to live the Hollywood dream, a legendary father, a devoted mother, accomplished children, and a life of wealth, recognition, and influence. Yet, as often happens with high-profile families, the public image can mask layers of complexity, tension, and conflict that only emerge when tragedy strikes. Before December 14th, 2025, the Reiner household had a life that seemed enviable, but beneath the polished exterior, there were undercurrents that would later prove devastating. To understand the events of that fateful day, it is essential to examine the family's daily life, their dynamics, and the subtle pressures that had been simmering for years. Rob and Michelle, though deeply committed to their children, managed a household where professional obligations, social expectations, and the glare of public attention intersected constantly. Long before the tragedy, the Reiners were navigating the delicate balancing act of being a high-profile family while trying to preserve a sense of normalcy. Nick Reiner, 32, was the eldest son whose life had always been under a microscope. Raised in a household where fame and expectation were constant companions, he experienced the dual pressures of public attention and private expectation. Friends describe him as intelligent and capable, yet prone to rebellion and emotional volatility. Within the family, Nick had struggled at times with feelings of inadequacy, a natural tension in families where one parent commands extraordinary public acclaim. Could these pressures have contributed to deeper resentments or conflicts that would later manifest in tragic ways? Jake Reiner, another central figure in the family story, was equally shaped by the pressures of growing up in such a household. Less publicly visible than Nick, Jake's role has been the subject of considerable speculation. Rumors, indirect reports, and subtle hints suggest that his presence and influence within the family may have been more significant than initially understood. What was his relationship like with his parents and siblings? Were there tensions or unresolved conflicts that played a part in the unfolding tragedy? These are questions that remain central to understanding the Reiner family before December 14th. The household itself was a study in contrasts. On one hand, it was a place of creativity, laughter, and shared experiences. Family dinners, vacations, and celebrations offered moments of connection and joy. Rob's legacy as a filmmaker meant that artistic discussion, movie analysis, and creative inspiration were common topics around the dining table. Michelle, with her grounding presence, ensured that these moments were balanced with discipline, guidance, and an emphasis on emotional well-being. Yet, as with any family under pressure, moments of harmony often masked underlying tensions. Financial considerations, too, added complexity to the Reiner household. While public perception painted a picture of effortless wealth and privilege, managing finances in a family with multiple high-profile careers, inheritances, and business dealings is rarely simple. Conflicts over money, inheritance, and responsibility are common in families of this stature, and while they may seem minor to outsiders, they can exacerbate emotional tensions within the home. Did financial strain, disagreements, or perceived inequities contribute to the tensions that would later erupt? It's a question that cannot be ignored. Social expectations and public scrutiny were another constant. Living under the microscope of Hollywood, every decision, from career moves to parenting choices, was subject to judgment. For the Reiner children, this environment could foster both opportunity and resentment. Praise and attention for achievements could quickly turn to criticism or jealousy, creating a volatile emotional landscape. Nick and Jake, navigating their identities in the shadow of fame, may have experienced internal conflicts that no one outside the home could fully comprehend. How does growing up in such a spotlight affect trust, loyalty, and family cohesion? For the Reiners, the answer would be devastatingly apparent. Even mundane family interactions were affected by this high-profile existence. Daily routines, dinners, school, work, and social events were complicated by schedules, travel, and obligations. Parents trying to maintain authority and emotional connection often had to negotiate with children who were developing their own identities in a high-pressure environment. Conflicts, even minor ones, could escalate rapidly under stress. Did these everyday pressures play a role in the eventual tragedy? Observers suggest that while nothing in isolation seemed extraordinary, the accumulation of stress, expectation, and emotional volatility created a perfect storm. Beyond logistics and public scrutiny, there were emotional dynamics to consider. Rob and Michelle were deeply committed to their children, but familial love is not always enough to prevent conflict. Reports from friends and colleagues indicate that the Reiners had their share of disagreements, arguments over behavior, choices, and values that might have seemed typical in any household, but carried amplified significance in this environment. Emotional undercurrents, when left unaddressed, can fester over time. Could these long-standing tensions have contributed to a catastrophic breaking point? The Reiners' extended social circle also played a role in family dynamics. Friends, colleagues, and acquaintances often brought additional pressures and expectations into the household. While these connections enriched the family's social and professional life, they also introduced opportunities for conflict, envy, or miscommunication. Navigating this network required skill, diplomacy, and patience, qualities that Michelle possessed in abundance, but that could not always counteract the unpredictability of human behavior. One cannot overlook the role of secrecy and privacy within the household. Michelle, in particular, valued discretion, protecting the family from media intrusion and public speculation. While this shielded the family from external judgment, it also meant that internal conflicts may have been less visible to those who might have intervened or offered support. Private tensions, kept behind closed doors, could escalate without external checks. A dangerous combination in a family already operating under extraordinary stress. Looking at the family before the tragedy, it becomes clear that the Reiners were not unlike other high-profile households in Hollywood. Outwardly glamorous, inwardly complex, and constantly negotiating the pressures of public life. But what distinguishes this story is how those pressures intersected with interpersonal dynamics, emotional volatility, and unresolved conflict. The foundation of the household, though seemingly stable, was susceptible to cracks that no one fully understood until it was too late. As December 14th approached, subtle signs of tension may have gone unnoticed, or may have been dismissed as typical family disputes. Arguments, disagreements, and small conflicts likely occurred, but they were part of a larger, less visible pattern, a pattern of stress, expectation, and complex emotional entanglement that would culminate in a tragedy no one saw coming. The family's public image, successful, loving, and stable, belied a private reality where unresolved tensions simmered beneath the surface. And then there is the question of influence within the household. Nick and Jake, as children navigating their own paths, were shaped by both their parents' guidance and their perceptions of fairness, control, and autonomy. In high-pressure families, children can internalize resentment, jealousy, or rebellion in ways that are not immediately apparent. Could such dynamics have contributed to events that ultimately destroyed the family? Understanding these nuances is critical to understanding what happened that December day. The stage was set. The Reiners' family life, though outwardly enviable, was a complex web of love, expectation, pressure, and tension. Each member of the household carried hopes, fears, and unresolved emotions that intersected in ways that none could fully control. The household, like any, had moments of joy and laughter, but beneath those moments were patterns of conflict, unspoken grievances, and latent volatility. On December 14th, all of these forces would collide in a way that would shatter not just the family, but the public perception of their lives. So, what did life look like for the Reiners before the tragedy? It looked perfect from a distance. Loving parents, accomplished children, wealth, and influence. But closer inspection reveals a household shaped by pressures, tensions, and emotional complexity. This is the context within which the events of December 14th must be understood. A family with love, influence, and privilege, but also with vulnerabilities, secrets, and unresolved conflict. As we move forward to the next chapter, the day of the tragedy itself, we will examine the timeline, the events, and the moments that led to the shocking deaths of Rob and Michelle. The idyllic facade of the Reiner family would crumble in an instant, leaving questions, fear, and horror in its wake. But what came next would change everything. And no one could have anticipated the devastating turn of events that awaited them. December 14th, 2025, began like any other Sunday in Los Angeles. The city stirred slowly under the pale winter sun, unaware that it was about to witness a tragedy that would reverberate across Hollywood and beyond. In a quiet, upscale neighborhood, the Reiners' home appeared serene, a picture of suburban elegance mixed with the unmistakable touches of a family steeped in wealth and creative accomplishment. But behind the doors of this seemingly perfect household, events were unfolding that would shock the world. The morning had been ordinary. Rob Reine, 78, reportedly engaged in routine activities, checking correspondence, reading, and perhaps reflecting on upcoming projects. Michelle, 68, attended to household affairs, balancing personal tasks with family responsibilities. On the surface, the day held all the calm and normalcy of a weekend, punctuated by the soft rhythms of domestic life. Yet the day would prove anything but ordinary. The first signs of catastrophe were subtle, almost imperceptible. Perhaps it was a missed call, an unusual silence, or a door left unlocked. Within hours, the ordinary morning of a celebrated family would be replaced by chaos. Paramedics were called at 3:30 p.m., a routine emergency response that quickly escalated into a horrifying scene no one could have imagined. By the time Los Angeles Police Department officers arrived, the extent of the tragedy was clear. Rob and Michelle Reiner had suffered fatal stab wounds. The calm suburban afternoon had transformed into a crime scene that would dominate headlines and social media feeds for days. What made this day so shocking wasn't just the deaths themselves, but the circumstances surrounding them. The Reiners were not strangers to public attention, yet the violence that struck their home was almost inconceivable. Neighbors described the family as quiet, private, and reserved. To see law enforcement vehicles, paramedics, and flashing lights in front of their home was surreal. How could a family that had seemed so stable, so loving, be caught in such a devastating and violent scenario? Inside the house, the scene was chaotic yet meticulously documented. Officers and forensic teams meticulously recorded every detail. Blood evidence, positions of objects, and spatial arrangement all suggested a violent struggle. The medical examiner would later confirm that the couple had suffered multiple sharp force injuries, each wound a testament to the brutality of the attack. Yet the scene itself raised more questions than answers. Were there signs of forced entry? Had anyone been inside beforehand? And most importantly, who could commit such an act within the walls of a family home? The response from emergency services provides a chilling lens into the unfolding horror. Paramedics who entered the home were met with scenes that few professionals are prepared to encounter. The juxtaposition of ordinary domestic items, books, photographs, furniture, with the violence of the attack created a surreal atmosphere. First responders reported shock, disbelief, and a somber understanding that this would be a case remembered for decades. Every step, every piece of evidence, seemed to hint at both desperation and calculation. Could this have been a crime of passion, premeditated action, or something even more sinister? News of the tragedy spread with extraordinary speed. Within hours, media outlets were reporting the deaths of Rob and Michelle Reine. Social media erupted with shock, speculation, and grief. Fans who had followed Rob's career for decades were left speechless, struggling to reconcile the life of laughter, creativity, and inspiration with the violence that had claimed him and his wife. The internet became a cacophony of disbelief. Headlines screamed, commentary flooded forums, and amateur investigators debated every possible angle. But amidst the frenzy, the human dimension of the tragedy often gets lost, the pain of family, friends, and those who truly knew the couple. At the heart of the investigation were the children, particularly Nick Reine. Within a day of the tragedy, he was taken into custody on suspicion of murdering his parents. The news sent shockwaves through Los Angeles and the entertainment industry. Nick, a man in his early 30s, was now at the center of a high-profile criminal investigation, a development that seemed impossible to many who had known him. What had led to this point? What pressures, conflicts, or dynamics had culminated in such a catastrophic act? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, as the city grappled with the implications of a family torn apart from within. Meanwhile, the world watched closely as law enforcement began piecing together the timeline. Officers worked tirelessly to reconstruct the events leading up to the attack, interviewing neighbors, examining evidence, and cross-referencing accounts. Every detail, no matter how small, was scrutinized. Even minor inconsistencies, an unusual phone call, a door left ajar, an out-of-place object, could hold the key to understanding the tragedy. The pressure on investigators was immense, the public demanded answers, and the family's fame only heightened the stakes. The medical examiner's role became central in shaping the narrative. The report, released 3 days later on December 17th, confirmed that Rob and Michelle had died from multiple sharp force injuries. While this was consistent with initial reports from paramedics and sources, it added an official weight to the growing horror. The precision of the wounds suggested intentionality, raising questions about premeditation and motive. Every detail of the report would be analyzed, debated, and dissected by law enforcement, the media, and the public. Yet, even with the medical examiner's confirmation, critical questions remained unanswered. Who carried out the attack? What was the motive? How could someone close to the family, perhaps even within it, commit such an act? Rumors began circulating about other family members, particularly Jake Reine, whose role in the household had been less public but whose influence was becoming increasingly scrutinized. The narrative shifted from simple tragedy to a tangled web of suspicion, betrayal, and potential conspiracy. Neighbors, friends, and colleagues offered their perspectives, painting a picture of a family that was, outwardly, loving and accomplished. Yet even they admitted that the Reiners had moments of tension, subtle disagreements that, in hindsight, might have hinted at deeper issues. The challenge lies in understanding the hidden pressures of high-profile households. How fame, wealth, and public expectation intersect with private conflict in ways that can escalate unpredictably. Could the tragedies of December 14th have been prevented? Or were they the result of forces beyond anyone's control? As the day ended, the reality of the Reiners' deaths began to settle in. Families across the country who admired the couple grappled with disbelief. Hollywood itself, a world accustomed to drama and spectacle, paused to acknowledge a tragedy that defied imagination. The combination of fame, family, and fatal violence created a narrative that was both horrifying and compelling, a story that would dominate headlines, social media, and public discussion for months, if not years. By the evening, law enforcement had begun to secure the crime scene, interview neighbors, and analyze evidence. Paramedics, shaken but professional, prepared their reports, while the first public statements trickled out. Among them, the arrest of Nick Reine loomed large. A development that no one had predicted and that would dominate media coverage. Suddenly, the tragedy was no longer about random violence. It became a deeply personal, family-centered story with implications that were both legal and emotional. The day that began with quiet normalcy had ended in chaos, grief, and unanswered questions. The Reiner's story, previously one of fame, accomplishment, and creative brilliance, had been forever altered by an act of violence that struck at the heart of the family itself. And yet, even as December 14th drew to a close, the full scope of the tragedy had not yet been revealed. Investigators would continue to piece together timelines, motives, and potential accomplices, while the public struggled to understand how a family so admired could experience such horror. December 14th, 2025, is now remembered not just as a date in the Reiner's history, but as a day that changed the public perception of Hollywood, family, and safety. It serves as a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that fame and influence do not immunize against tragedy, and that the most shocking events often emerge from the most familiar settings. But what came next, the arrests, revelations, and deeper investigations, would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The moment law enforcement arrived at the Reine residence, they knew this was no ordinary case. The scene was chilling, a stark contrast to the idyllic appearance of the home from the street. Forensics experts described it as a carefully orchestrated chaos. Objects displaced, signs of struggle, and the unmistakable presence of violence that could not be ignored. In a house that had been filled with laughter, creativity, and memories, the traces of horror now dominated every corner. Paramedics had already confirmed the deaths of Rob and Michelle Reine when officers began their detailed assessment. The body positions, blood spatter patterns, and other physical evidence immediately suggested multiple sharp force injuries. Investigators noted that the wounds were precise, suggesting intent and possibly premeditation. Yet, despite the brutality, there were no obvious signs of forced entry. Could someone the victims knew have carried out the attack? Could it have been someone from inside the household? From the very beginning, the case carried an unsettling implication. The danger may have come from within. The forensic team meticulously documented every inch of the home. Each object, from overturned furniture to personal belongings, was cataloged and photographed. They examined fingerprints, footprints, and even microscopic traces of material that might point to the assailant. Crime scene investigators often describe this process as a combination of art and science. Every detail matters, and seemingly insignificant evidence can be the key to solving a complex case. In the Reiner's home, every surface seemed to tell a story, and experts worked to piece together the sequence of events that led to the tragedy. Blood pattern analysis revealed a narrative of struggle, but the specifics remained unclear. Was there an initial confrontation? Did the victims attempt to defend themselves? Forensic psychologists would later interpret the positioning and nature of the wounds to explore the emotional state of both the victims and the assailant. These details, while technical, are crucial for constructing a timeline and understanding motive. They also provide insight into the psychological dynamics that often accompany familial violence. The investigation quickly turned toward the family. Within a day, Nick Reine, 32, was taken into custody on suspicion of murdering his parents. The LAPD confirmed he was being held without bail, charged with 2 counts of murder. This arrest was a shocking development, transforming the tragedy from a crime scene into a courtroom drama. Nick's prior life, behavior, and relationship with his parents became subjects of intense scrutiny. Friends, colleagues, and even casual acquaintances were interviewed to understand the dynamics that might have led to such a catastrophic act. While Nick's arrest dominated headlines, investigators were careful to follow every lead. Witness statements, digital communications, financial records, and social interactions were all examined for anomalies. Investigators noted patterns of tension and conflict that, in hindsight, could suggest a motive. Every conversation, every argument, and every disagreement became a potential clue. In families of public figures, these details are magnified because public scrutiny often exacerbates private stressors. In the Reiner's case, the intersection of fame and familial tension created a situation that was both complex and volatile. Attention also turned to Jake Reiner, whose role in the household had been less visible but nonetheless significant. Rumors of influence, involvement, or indirect complicity began circulating, forcing investigators to examine all angles. Could he have contributed to the events of December 14th, either directly or indirectly? Was there a larger familial or psychological dynamic at play that had gone unnoticed for years? The investigation was only beginning to peel back the layers of a complex, high-profile household that suddenly became the epicenter of a criminal inquiry. Forensic evidence played a pivotal role in shaping the narrative. Every fingerprint, every fiber, and every trace of DNA became a piece of a puzzle that could illuminate the truth. Forensic teams worked around the clock, processing samples and cross-referencing them with databases. Even the smallest details, the angle of a blade mark, the direction of blood spatter, the positioning of objects, were crucial for reconstructing the events of that day. These technical analyses would later be central in court proceedings, providing objective evidence amidst a sea of speculation and rumor. Law enforcement also examined digital evidence, including phone records, text messages, and emails. These communications offered glimpses into the relationships, conflicts, and possible tensions within the household. Investigators sought patterns that might indicate premeditation or escalation, focusing on moments that could shed light on motive. The Reiner family's high-profile status meant that every message, however trivial it might have seemed, could carry significant weight. The interplay between private communication and public scrutiny added another layer of complexity to the investigation. Media scrutiny was relentless. From the moment the crime scene was secured, reporters and social media users speculated about motive, involvement, and family dynamics. Headlines oscillated between fact and conjecture, amplifying public interest while sometimes obscuring the core details of the investigation. Law enforcement had to manage both the technical investigation and the intense public pressure, ensuring that facts were accurately represented while protecting the integrity of the case. In families of fame, this balance is critical because misinformation can complicate both legal proceedings and public perception. Investigators also explored the possibility of financial or interpersonal motives. In high-profile families, disputes over inheritance, career opportunities, or family control can create pressure points that outsiders may never fully understand. Could unresolved conflicts or long-standing resentments have played a role in the tragedy? While nothing was confirmed initially, these lines of inquiry were essential to forming a complete picture of the events leading to December 14th. Every interaction, every dispute, and every subtle behavioral pattern became part of the larger puzzle. Even with the arrest of Nick Reiner, the investigation remained far from complete. Forensics, interviews, and digital evidence had to be meticulously cross-referenced to build a coherent narrative. Experts examined psychological profiles, family dynamics, and historical tensions. These analyses are often critical in cases involving family members, because the interplay between emotion, history, and opportunity can illuminate otherwise inexplicable behavior. In the Reiner's case, the combination of fame, influence, and domestic complexity made the investigation particularly challenging. As the investigation continued, law enforcement made a point of emphasizing that all leads were being explored. While Nick's arrest suggested a primary suspect, authorities acknowledged that understanding the full context of the tragedy required examining every aspect of the household and family relationships. Witnesses were interviewed multiple times, forensic evidence was reanalyzed, and experts in criminal behavior were consulted to ensure no stone was left unturned. The complexity of the case demanded diligence, precision, and an understanding of both human behavior and the technical aspects of crime scene analysis. By the end of the initial investigation phase, a clearer, but still incomplete, picture began to emerge. Rob and Michelle Reine had died from multiple sharp force injuries in what appeared to be a violent, personal attack. Nick Reine was in custody, facing 2 counts of murder. Jake Reiner's role remained under scrutiny, adding an additional layer of mystery and tension. The forensic and digital evidence collected promised to reveal more, but at this point, the tragedy was as much about family dynamics, emotional tension, and interpersonal relationships as it was about physical evidence. December 14th and the days that followed revealed a chilling reality. Even families that seem perfect on the surface can harbor tensions, conflicts, and vulnerabilities that may escalate unpredictably. The Reiner's story, which began with laughter, creativity, and love, ended in violence, suspicion, and profound loss. The crime scene and investigation provide not just a record of what happened, but a window into the complex interplay of fame, family, and human emotion. And as investigators continued to piece together the events of that fateful day, it became increasingly clear that the tragedy was not a simple story of chance. It was the culmination of hidden pressures, unresolved conflicts, and perhaps choices made by those closest to the victims. But what came next? The shocking revelations, the courtroom drama, and the unearthing of hidden truths would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The arrest of Nick Reine on December 15, 2025, was nothing short of a seismic shock to both Hollywood and the general public. Within 24 hours of the tragic deaths of Rob and Michelle Reine, the world learned that one of their own children had been taken into custody, facing suspicion of the unthinkable, the murder of his parents. For many, it was impossible to reconcile the image of a son, raised in a household filled with love, privilege, and guidance, with the possibility that he could be implicated in such a horrific act. The arrest didn't just mark the next phase of the investigation. It ignited a firestorm of public debate, speculation, and disbelief. Nick Reine, 32, had grown up in the unique environment of a high-profile Hollywood family. His father, a legendary filmmaker and actor, and his mother, a force of intelligence and emotional stability, shaped his upbringing with both care and expectation. But public attention, familial pressure, and personal struggles can have unpredictable effects on children, even those raised with love and resources. In the immediate aftermath of the tragedy, investigators began looking closely at Nick's relationships, personal history, and interactions with his parents to determine motive and opportunity. Every detail of his life became relevant. The arrest itself was highly orchestrated, conducted with precision by the Los Angeles Police Department. Officers approached Nick's residence, or wherever he was located at the time, with caution, fully aware of the intense media attention that would follow. News crews, photographers, and social media users were already swirling around the story, hungry for information, speculation, and footage of the unfolding drama. Within moments, the arrest became a global headline, a story that spread across newspapers, television, and digital platforms with astonishing speed. At a press conference shortly after the arrest, LAPD Chief Jim McDonnell confirmed that Nick Reine had been taken into custody and was being held without bail, charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of Rob and Michelle Reine. McDonnell's statements, while professional and measured, sent a chilling message. This was no ordinary case of domestic tragedy. It involved premeditation, familial betrayal, and a criminal investigation that would not be resolved quickly. The implications were immediate and far-reaching, both legally and emotionally. Public reaction was immediate and polarized. Fans of Rob Reiner's work, who had admired his contributions to film and television for decades, struggled to process the arrest of his son. Social media platforms became battlegrounds of opinion. Some expressed shock and disbelief, some expressed anger, and others speculated about deeper family issues that might have led to the tragedy. Every comment, post, and viral thread added layers of pressure, not just for Nick, but for law enforcement, legal teams, and the family's extended network of friends and associates. Media coverage oscillated between reporting facts and engaging in conjecture. Details about the Reine family, once considered private, were dissected publicly. Childhood experiences, financial arrangements, family dynamics, and past conflicts became fodder for analysis. In many ways, the coverage blurred the line between criminal investigation and entertainment spectacle. A cruel irony for a family whose lives had been devoted to storytelling and public engagement. How much of what was being reported reflected reality, and how much was sensationalism? In cases like this, separating truth from rumor becomes one of the most daunting challenges. Nick himself became a figure of intense scrutiny. Reports from acquaintances, neighbors, and colleagues described him in various ways: intelligent, reserved, emotionally complex, and occasionally volatile. Law enforcement sought to understand how these traits, combined with the pressures of fame and family expectation, might have intersected with the events of December 14th. Every detail mattered: his movements, communications, and interactions in the hours leading up to the tragedy were carefully examined. The arrest also raised critical questions about motive. Was this a crime of passion, a spontaneous act, or the result of long-simmering resentment? Could familial tensions, perceived slights, or psychological struggles have escalated to this extreme? Investigators pursued multiple angles, from financial disputes to personal conflicts, attempting to construct a coherent narrative from a complex and emotionally charged situation. Every lead was scrutinized, every possible connection explored, because in cases involving family members, the line between intent and accident can be exceptionally difficult to determine. Legal experts quickly weighed in, highlighting the unique challenges of prosecuting a case of this nature. A son accused of killing his parents presents a mix of emotional and evidentiary complications. Witness testimony can be unreliable, emotional biases are heightened, and the public scrutiny can influence both jury selection and courtroom dynamics. Defense strategies, prosecutorial approaches, and media management would all become central to the unfolding legal battle. The arrest had not just personal implications. It was setting the stage for a high-profile courtroom saga that would attract attention for months, if not years. Public opinion remained volatile. Social media users speculated about everything from psychological profiles to potential accomplices, particularly the role of Jake Reiner. Conspiracy theories, rumors, and unverified claims proliferated online, complicating the investigation and amplifying the emotional stakes. For the Reiner family, navigating this maelstrom of attention became an additional layer of trauma.